Hey everybody, I'm Joanna Hill with J Hill Fine Art. Today we will be talking about the grid method. The grid method is a drawing technique that can be used to copy an image without having to trace or draw freehand. You can also use this technique to enlarge or shrink the size of an image. Say you have a picture you want to draw, you don't have the skills to draw it freehand, and you don't want to trace it. Instead, using the grid method is a great choice. It helps to break down your reference photo into much smaller, more manageable sections, and it also helps you improve your drawing skills. This technique is great for all skill levels, beginner and advanced. I will use this method from time to time when I'm trying to draw out a very complicated picture with lots of details. It just helps to keep myself from getting lost. So this is your basic grid. It's just a box with vertical and horizontal lines that you would place on top of the image you want to draw and your drawing paper. In this image we have two 4x4 grids with an image placed in the center. The image on the left is the image I want to draw, and the image on the right is what would be my line drawing. These grids have been drawn out as the exact same size as the other. Having equal-sized squares or grids gives you an equal-sized drawing. Depending on your image size or paper size, you may need to adjust what size grid and also what size squares you need. Suppose you want to make your end result larger or smaller than your reference photo. You would still need to keep the same amount of squares in your grid, but on your drawing surface, adjust the square measurement. In the example below, I have drawn my grid on my reference photo with 1-inch sized squares, and on my drawing paper, I have drawn 5-inch sized squares. When you're drawing out your grid, take care to measure carefully. If I were to measure out my grid using a 1-inch square on my reference, then a 1-inch by 2-inch square on my drawing, the end result will be skewed. Not saying you have to use squares, but as long as your measurements in one grid match the other, your image will come out correctly. So let's review before I put this all into practice. For whatever size image you have, you need to figure out what size grid to place on it. If your image is a 4-inch by 4-inch picture, you can break that down into 4 1-inch squares horizontally and vertically. Then decide if you want to keep that same size or shrink it or enlarge it. In this example, it's doubled in size, so I must double the size of my squares horizontally and vertically. So I can draw an 8-inch square and break that down into 4 rows of 2-inch squares. I'm still keeping that 1-to-1 ratio, 4 rows of squares by 4 rows of squares, even though they are different sizes. Okay, I'm going to show you 2 examples on how to use the grid method in your drawing. Go ahead and grab some rulers and we'll get started. On my reference picture of this apple, I drew an 8-inch by 6-inch grid with 1-inch squares. I want to shrink the size of this picture, so my drawing paper I drew a 4-inch by 3-inch grid with 1/2-inch squares. Once you have your grid drawn, you can number and letter them like I have here. This helps to keep you on track if you end up getting lost. So here I am going one box at a time, drawing just the outline of the objects in my image. I'm focusing on each box individually as it corresponds to the reference photo's grid. I'm looking at where the horizontal and vertical lines of the grid overlap areas of my image. Finding these landmarks of intersecting points clue you into where your outlines should be going.
What's up is down, what's left is right. Chasing stars and holding you. I can't see the end, but we'll see it through.
Let's try one more sample, only this time I'm going to be enlarging my image. I drew a 7-inch by 4-inch grid using 1-inch squares on my reference photo. I want to enlarge it by 1/2 inch, so the grid on my drawing paper needs to be 10.5 inches by 6 inches with 1.5-inch squares. Just as before, I'm carefully going one box at a time and looking for where my image intersects with the grid. This technique may seem a little complicated at first, but it really helps you in training your eye to see specific areas that you need to focus on. By consistently looking at your reference and where your hand is on your paper, that is very crucial when it comes to drawing freehand. The hand-eye coordination coupled with finding landmarks of intersecting lines and shapes is key to capturing an object accurately. After I'm done with my grid drawing, I will typically go over all my lines with black ink so I can use my light box to then trace the image onto a clean piece of paper for the final drawing. So that's the basics on using the grid method. It's a very handy tool to use when creating your artwork. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned a lot, and if you have any questions, please leave it in the comments below. I'll catch you next time.